Welcome back to Hard Money. Joining me this week is Alex Gladstein, Chief Strategy Officer for the Human Rights Foundation and author of Check Your Financial Privilege. Alex, thanks so much for joining me.
It's a pleasure to be on. Thank you.
Well, I want to talk to you about the inflation crises that we see playing out across the world. We think 9.1% is bad here in the US, but we're seeing hundreds of percent in some other countries. Can you talk to us about what people need to know? Because you have so much experience on the ground with folks that are dealing with the rising cost of living and human rights violations in different countries.
Sure. Well, look, we're still in the fiat standard for better or worse. And obviously for us here, we think for worse. But the reality is we're still in the fiat standard. And in that world, there's only one money, and that's the US dollar. And what happens during crises like this is that people run out of dollars. And when they run out of dollars, they can't pay their debts. And these sovereigns cannot get the food and energy they need to satisfy the populations. So you have economic collapse and uprising. Right now, you have 30% or more inflation for more than 1 billion people, which is just a staggering, absolutely devastating reality. You also have double-digit food inflation for another 2.5 billion people when you consider that India, the United States, the EU, are all very close to 9 to 10% inflation. That means their food inflation is double digits. So no one's kind of like not feeling the pressure right now. The only major country that doesn't have like very high inflation at the moment, from what their own kind of statisticians are telling us, is China, and they're all on lockdown. You know, there's not a whole lot of inflation there because no one's buying anything because they're all on lockdown. So no one's doing very well right now, and we're kind of all sort of prisoners of this fiat currency system. Is the reality.
So, what is causing this? Is it the rising interest rates by the Fed? Is it the war in Russia, Ukraine? What's contributing to this? Is it a combination?
Yeah, when you look back at history, you have episodes like the Asian financial crisis. I think that you have over leveraged industries in different areas, whether they be, in real estate, in consumer borrowing, whether it be, auto loans, things like that. You have different loans in different parts of the industry and society gets over leveraged, and then the bubble bursts. And then what ends up happening in a lot of these countries is, they don't have the ability to access dollars, and they cannot pay off their own debts. And then things spiral even more out of control, and you get the kind of double-digit, triple-digit inflation that we're seeing. This has been cyclical. We've seen this over and over again over the last 5 decades in the post-71 political economy. And even the U.S. government is having issues. Even the country that can issue the currency that everybody else needs is having issues. So this brings people like me to be interested in a Bitcoin standard and in a different paradigm, because maybe we could live in a world where all countries would have equal access to the reserve currency. All countries would be able to use their energy reserves to create the world reserve currency. That would be a very different world than today, where only one country can issue it at its pleasure. So that's kind of what I'm here for.
Yeah, well, let's talk a little bit more about that because Bitcoin's adoption is growing faster in developing nations, and the use case may have more of a spotlight on it, especially in these crazy inflationary times. Can you talk about how Bitcoin can fix some of the issues we're seeing playing out across the globe?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, there's two things to keep in mind. Obviously, Bitcoin is down a lot since its like recent high, but it's also up a lot over the last 2 years, right? So you have a lot of people across the world, in Argentina, Turkey, Cuba, the Philippines, who got into Bitcoin sometime in the last 5 years, right? And a lot of them are doing well. I mean, a lot of them educated themselves, learned how to save in an asset that couldn't be confiscated. For a lot of them, Bitcoin has been extremely valuable. For people who got into it a little more recently, like let's say in the last year or so, maybe they're not doing so well. But I think that highlights the reality that we're still in the fiat standard, and that's why some people are interested in stable coins and in trying to bring that technology to Bitcoin, and trying to get Bitcoin users to be able to get dollar exposure. Personally, I think that's kind of a moral imperative. I think we live in a world where people need Bitcoin and dollars for now. Maybe a lucky few are able to get by just on Bitcoin. I think that's great, but for most people, they need to interact with the dollar for one reason or another. So I think we'll see the rise of open source non KYC wallets in the coming year or two that allow people to interact with both, which I think will be great. and that will be a absolute solution for billions of people. I mean, Bitcoin alone fixes a lot of things. It's a fabulous innovation. But right now, again, we're still in the fiat standard, and people need to get dollars. There's a huge dollar shortage, and it's really the cause of a lot of the problems you're seeing right now. I mean, of course, there's the war. Of course, there's supply chain issues. There are agricultural issues. But at the end of the day, you know, a lot of people in these countries, their government doesn't want them to have dollars. Like if you live in Nigeria or Turkey, the government is trying to prevent its population from accessing better currency. So again, I think we have this moral imperative to get as many people as possible onto Bitcoin, and then help those people get dollar exposure where they need it.
And also many governments trying to prevent access to Bitcoin. Before I let you go, Alex, you had a compelling, poignant reaction to when Vladimir Putin said he's going to ban Bitcoin payments. Can you offer us that message?
Yeah, sure. Well, look, I think that a lot of people in the media, in the mainstream media, they thought that Bitcoin would be good for Putin because it could allow him to get around sanctions. I think that that's a very kind of surface level take. The deeper take is that Bitcoin empowers individuals in society and takes away power from the government. And anything that does that, dictators are not going to like very much. So you have Putin coming in here and signing a law the other day, I think on the 14th, which prevents people in Russia from using Bitcoin and cryptocurrency for payments. So, you know, he's worried about Bitcoin eating into that. And you know what? He's got to kind of protect his ship, his economic ship, from sinking, and to do that, he needs to keep his population away from Bitcoin. At the end of the day, like, you know, I think you'd agree. A lot of people, you know, accuse Bitcoin of being the iceberg that sinks these states, and in reality, it's not. It's the lifeboat, right? So we want to get the lifeboat in the hands of as many Russians as possible, and in the hands of as many Sri Lankans as possible. I think Sri Lanka has been the moment, the image of a third world debt crisis and what it means to society. And I think that in the future, it is very possible that people can avoid the mistakes of their corrupt rulers by opting into Bitcoin. So, I mean, we remain hopeful.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Alex. Anything you're going to be watching for this week or in the coming weeks, just as far as Bitcoin or macro news in general?
Yeah, I mean, I would continue to look at countries in the emerging markets that have inflation crises. I mean, we're looking at Sudan, we're looking at Egypt, we're looking at Mozambique, we're looking at Ecuador. There are nationwide protests. And it's going to lead to, look at Pakistan. I think what's happening is you're getting IMF bailouts everywhere. Countries are losing their national sovereignty as a result of this trade-off that they make, which is part of this fiat system. I would continue to look at that. And I would continue to expect, you know, tight times for Bitcoin while the Fed continues to tighten. I mean, it impacts everybody around the world. I mean, the Fed says it wants to tighten to try and fight price inflation in the United States. As you're watching right now, an externality of that is, you know, massive economic collapse around the world. And again, that's just sort of part and parcel of our system. So I'd pay attention to what they're doing, you know, at the Fed, at the heart of the system, and then keep building. But thanks again for having me on.
Yeah, thank you so much. Building in this bear market, and such a great value proposition right now for Bitcoin, I think, around the world. Thanks so much, Alex.